Residents in the Yemeni city of Hodeidah woke up last Saturday to plumes of black smoke filling their skies. Israel had just struck the port, a main artery for the city, killing 9 people and injuring more than 80 others after hitting a fuel depot. The attack comes just a day after a Houthi drone hit Tel Aviv near a US embassy office. 1 person was killed. All of this marks an unprecedented escalation between the two sides since the war in Gaza began, an escalation that the international community has consistently warned against, the spillover of the war in Gaza beyond its borders. The Houthis have been routinely launching drone strikes at southern Israel and attacking commercial ships in the Red Sea. They say they're doing this to support the Palestinian people and that they'll only stop once a ceasefire is reached. The US has since led a multinational coalition to counter their attacks on global shipping, but this is the first time we see Israel hit Yemen directly. At the same time, Israel is engaged in cross-border attacks with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. It had also locked its targets on Syria, as we saw in April when it hit Iran's embassy complex in Damascus. That attack prompted Iran to launch a barrage of cruise missiles into Israel, although none of them made it through. All this begs the question: has the fear of regional escalation now been realized? Has the conflict in Gaza officially spilled over? And will this latest attack on Yemen be kept at bay, or will it provoke a much wider war that may be too late to contain? You're listening to Beyond the Headlines, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir. To understand the implications of this latest exchange of fire and its consequences across the region, I'm joined now by Abdelghani Al-Iryani, Senior Researcher at the Sana'a Center for Strategic Studies, and Kobi Michael, a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. Can you both give us a general overview of what happened? Why did Israel launch this attack on the port of Hodeidah, and why did the Houthis launch the attack on Tel Aviv? Can we start with a little bit of context with you, Abdelghani?
As you know, Yemenis are very passionate about the Palestinian cause. So the Houthis have done what most Yemenis agree with, which is to come to the support of the people of Gaza. And the Iranians, being as strategic as they always are, have provided the necessary equipment for the Houthis to reach Tel Aviv. The idea of that on the part of the Iranians is that they felt that as Israel was preparing to invade South Lebanon, they needed to increase the pressure on Israel without creating an excuse for Netanyahu to go into Lebanon. They needed, in other words, they needed an escalation that is non-escalatory. And what better than having Ansar Allah send the drone from Yemen, so that if there is any escalation, which did happen, Israel retaliating to that, it would be away from Lebanon and away from Hezbollah. So in that case, the strike served 2 purposes: to escalate and increase the pressure on Israel on the one side, and to draw the focus away from Hezbollah and on to Yemen. The area under Houthi control is about 20 times or 30 times the size of South Lebanon. So they could absorb the strike much better than Hezbollah.
Kobi, do you agree with the assessment of what happened? How does Israel view the Houthi strikes on Tel Aviv?
The Houthis are attacking Israel since the beginning of the war in October. And they launched more than 22 different aerial platforms, be it cruise missiles or ballistic missiles or drones, that most of them have been intercepted. The problem is that we are in a sort of, I would say, of a strategic peak in the Israeli eyes with regard to the war in Gaza on the one hand, the tension vis-a-vis Hezbollah on the other hand, the strategic comfort zone that Iran feels that it has due to the American strategy here, mainly, something that enables Iran to continue escalating the situation and destabilizing the situation by encouraging its proxies in the entire region to continue provocating Israel and continue escalating the situation. And eventually a point that Israel has decided to change the rules of the game. This was the signal that Israel signaled not only to the Houthis, understanding that this will not stop the hostility of the Houthis and will not stop their violence, but might deter them in this way or another. But it is a signal not only towards the Houthis. This is a signal for the Iranians, for Hezbollah, for Hamas, and for the United States of America as the leader of the international coalition in the Red Sea, because this is the most severe attack that was launched. And the idea that the Houthis are still blocking the Straits of Bab el-Mandeb, although the international coalition led by the United States is there, is something that I think cannot be tolerated. This is not an Israeli problem. This is an international problem.
Abdul Ghani, what are your sources in Hodeidah telling you about the impact of the attack? How has it affected the lives of the city's residents, for whom the port is a lifeline for Yemenis, providing more than 80% of the food and aid assistance that Yemenis need?
It will definitely have a lasting impact. The targets were the fuel tanks and the port. The gantry cranes were bombed and the fuel tanks were also bombed, which means that there will be a shortage of fuel. That means no electricity. That means no clean water. That means hospitals will suffer. I mean, it's the humanitarian impact is significant. Furthermore, there is no other port in Yemen that can substitute for Hodeidah, which means that there will be bottlenecks in the supply of humanitarian assistance to about 12 million Yemenis who are food insecure. The humanitarian impact of the strike is huge. The military impact is actually negative. I say that because I believe that it hasn't struck any military targets, but also it is serving the strategic objective of Iran to draw attention away from Hezbollah, to refocus Israel towards Yemen. But also, it is going to strengthen the integration of Houthis into the axis of resistance and draw it away from Saudi Arabia and draw it away from the possibility of having peace with other Yemenis. In every way, the Houthis and Iran have won by the Israeli strike.
First of all, I think that it is a military target. Once this civilian facility, the port, is used for military purposes, according to the international law and according to the logic of war, this is a military target, a pure military target, because it will not cause only problems with regard to the humanitarian situation, something that the Houthis themselves should have taken into account if they have any sort of responsibility and accountability toward their people. But this is something that will prevent the Houthis from accepting military aid from Iran. The second comment that I would like to make is with regard to the attention, as if it is an Iranian success. No, it is an Iranian failure, because this attack eventually will draw the attention of the international community. And we saw that 2 days after the attack, the Americans and the international coalition attacked the Houthis in the most severe manner in comparison to the last 8 months. It is still less severe than the Israeli attack, but more severe than the previous attack of the same coalition. So I do not agree with my colleague with regard to the ramification of this attack. And I think that this is a very significant signal toward Hezbollah as well. I mean, it will not push aside the attention from Hezbollah, but on the contrary, this is something that will cause, I would say, much more concern to the Lebanese government, because they understand that they might be next in turn.
Any comments, Abdul Ghani?
I mean, I haven't heard anything different from what we hear about Gaza, that every citizen in Gaza is a legitimate target because they are a human shield for the fighters. Along this line of logic, every road is a military target, every port, every airport, every hospital that has been rejected by the International Court of Justice, and I don't think that applies. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, Saudi Arabia has been trying for 2 years to normalize relations with the Houthis, not with Israel. And I think this is going to cause a hiccup in their effort to extricate themselves from Yemen by making a deal with the Houthis.
Let's talk a little bit about the detail of what happened. Kobe, we talked a lot on Beyond the Headlines about proportionality with regards to Israel's actions in Gaza and with regards to the huge civilian death toll there. Can we talk a little bit about what happened in Yemen? Hodeidah is a lifeline for millions of Yemenis. And so what we have seen is 9 people, yes, they were immediately killed by the strikes, but then the impact of these strikes on Al Hodeidah is much more than 9 people. And the strikes that the Houthis conducted on Tel Aviv killed 1 person. So is this a justifiable response?
It is justified in the half. I think that the IDF takes utmost efforts in order to minimize collateral damage. It doesn't mean that there is no collateral damage, but we do all the possible efforts in order to minimize that. And now with regard to Al Hodeidah, as I said before, okay, this is a military target, although it is used also for other purposes, but it is used in order to fortify the Houthis, and all the aerial platforms that were launched towards Israel, and Israel contained, and Israel was restrained for almost 9 months, and after 220 attacks, okay, all of the facilities, all of the platforms are imported to Yemen from Iran, and the entrance gate is Al Hodeidah port. So what exactly Israel has to do? Okay, how exactly Israel can prevent the Houthis from having Iranian platforms that will hit Israel? Okay, so I think that such questions, like in the case of Hamas, should be addressed to the Houthis, not to Israel.
Kobe just made the point that the port is being used to funnel weapons from Iran. Does that make the port then a legitimate military target?
The United Nations has been reporting regularly on the flow of weapons to Houthis, and they have not singled out Port of Hodeidah. They have not even a single incident of Port of Hodeidah being used for smuggling. Weapons are smuggled overland from the south, and the drone that was launched on Tel Aviv was launched from the island of Kamaran. So all what my colleague said is actually baseless, and they have no reality, no relation to reality.
The Yemeni government has warned that the Houthi rebels should reconsider their actions. So obviously the Yemeni government is not in support of Houthi actions in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb. The Houthis say they are fighting against Israel's war in Gaza. And now we're seeing the real consequence of these actions on Yemenis themselves, Abdel Ghani. Are the Houthis considering the potential catastrophic outcome of their attacks? And were their attacks on the Red Sea actually being done for the sake of Gaza and for the sake of the Palestinians? There were some reports that said the Houthis were losing popularity inside Sana'a and wanted to create a diversion from that and regain their popularity at home.
The Houthis have never had real popularity in Sana'a. They are a ruthless organization that uses police control over the population. However, since the beginning of the Gaza war, millions of Yemenis have been flooding the squares in Sana'a and around Yemen in support of the Palestinians. So the Houthis have actually won a bonanza of popular support by their action in solidarity with the resistance in Gaza. However, the consequences to the people are, I believe, going to be great. And it is not up to me, being outside of Yemen and not suffering the consequences, to decide whether it's worth it, what they're doing is worth it. But the population who's been going out to the streets and saying, we don't care, seem to agree with the Houthis that it is worth it.
Kobe, what's your take on this?
I think that this is something that indicates the miserable situation of the Yemens as well as of the entire Arab world, unfortunately. We see how poor is the situation of most of the Arab countries, mainly Yemen, okay? The ultimate examples of a failed state. And this is what they are concentrating on. I think that this is a very concerning indication about the entire situation of countries like the country of Yemen. And unfortunately, this is not the only Arab country in such a situation. And I haven't seen the international community, including the UN, so concerned about the horrifying situation in Yemen and the hundreds of thousands of people that were killed there, or hundreds of thousands of people that were butchered in Syria. and the situation in Syria, or the situation in Libya, or the situation in Somalia, or the situation in Sudan. But the international community, led by the UN, is mainly focused and interested in Gaza and in the Palestinians, and they have nothing to say about the other conflict zones, which are much more severe than Gaza.
Is this going to mark a new era in conflict in the region? Or is this just a tit for tat? Is this just a one-off? Houthis struck Tel Aviv to send a message. Israel's, struck Hodeidah to send a message. And that's it.
I think what is new is that the Iron Dome has been defeated. If the Houthis manage to replicate the attack and do it over and over again, if it's a one-time off, then it has no significance strategically. In terms of the Israeli retaliation, there are hundreds of US and British jet fighters in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Three squadrons of Israeli jet fighters will not make the difference. The only difference is that the Israelis are willing to kill civilians while the Americans and the Brits are trying to avoid that. But killing civilians, while it hurts the civilian population, it actually gives legitimacy to the Houthi movement and makes the Houthi movement stronger and more popular. Overall, it is backfiring on Israel, and I think the Israelis will not be able to maintain this level of retaliation for the long term.
Kobe?
I think that with regard to your question, the key is Iran. And as long as the American strategy towards Iran and the regional strategy towards Iran will not be changed as the head of the octopus in this regard, things will not be changed dramatically here in the region. And I think that when the United States of America will make its call and will take out Iran from its comfort zone by intensifying the economic sanctions on the Iranians in the way that the Iranian will not be able to finance all of its proxies. And on the other hand, will begin attacking Iranian assets, be it Iranian proxies or Iranian assets on the Iranian soil, things will begin changing. And this is, as I said in the beginning, it is not the private problem of the state of Israel. This is the problem of the entire region, and this is the problem of the entire international community. This is not a private war between Israel and Hamas.
Kobe, many analysts have said, including some of your colleagues, that it is in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's interests to keep the war going because he's afraid of what will happen once the war ends. How does this attack on Yemen reflect internally in Israel, and what bearing will it all have on Israel's political future?
First, I do not accept the interpretation about the motivation of Prime Minister Netanyahu to assure that the war will last because of political consideration, okay? But I don't think that he wants or motivated to assure that this will be a prolonged war. On the contrary. But he wants to finalize, to end the war under his conditions, okay, in a way that we will not find ourselves under another severe security threat. And with regard to the attack in Yemen, I think that the idea of attacking Yemen is something which gains a very, very broad consensus among the Israeli constituency. And I think that the vast majority of the Israeli public understands that this is another phase or another part or another component of the multi-front war that Israel is already engaged in. And from time to time, we have to do what we have to do. And I think that everybody here in Israel understands that, unfortunately, we don't have partners that we are able to negotiate with them about a peaceful future for all the people here in the region.
Abdelghani, we want to ask you, just a few days before the Houthi attack, the group said it would stop all its activities if a ceasefire was reached in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. So wouldn't its attacks on Tel Aviv therefore complicate matters and make a ceasefire a little bit more difficult to reach?
Well, the Israelis have shown no seriousness about stopping the war or ceasefire. There is every indication that they are undercarrying a transfer of population. They want Israel from the river to the sea. The most militant of the Zionists are now in control of the leadership in Israel, and they do not need the Houthis to become more militant. I don't think that what the Houthis did will make a negative impact on the prospects for peace in Palestine. I think it is more likely to make it harder for Israel to carry out an attack on South Lebanon and regionalizing the war, widening the war, which is the intent of the Netanyahu government to draw the US into a direct confrontation with Iran, which will be devastating to the entire region.
Before we wrap up, I want to ask you both. The Houthis and Hezbollah have said that they would stop attacks if a Gaza ceasefire is reached with Hamas. But Israel said that even if a ceasefire is reached, that it would not end its battle on other fronts. So one way to look at this is that Israel wants to escalate across the region and not end the conflict, even if the other parties have already expressed their willingness to do that. So how will this war ever actually come to an end?
This war could be ended in October 8th if Hamas would have returned all the hostages and all the leaders of Hamas, the military leaders and the political leaders would have left the Gaza Strip exactly as Arafat and his gang left Beirut in September 1982. There would have not been any invasion to the Gaza Strip and not even a war. The war will be ended only when all the military and governmental centers of gravity of Hamas in the Gaza Strip will be dismantled, that Hamas will not be able to regroup itself once again as a sovereign power, as an effective ruler of the Gaza Strip, and the reality on the ground in the Gaza Strip will be changed in a way that another October 7th will not be possible.
Abdel Ghani?
The Knesset has just voted to reject any possibility of two-state solution. The only solution to the conflict in Palestine is a two-state solution. The militants, the radical right that now control Israel will not stop the war. It is not up to the Palestinians. It's not up to the international community, which my colleague Kobe has identified as a terrorist organization. We are all terrorists. We are all anti-Semites. And the Israelis will not stop until they eradicate the Palestinian cause altogether, transferring the Palestinians, as they have indicated in many instances by some of the most militant spokespersons of the Israeli government, transferring them to Jordan and to Sinai. In this instance, the war will not stop. And the only way to stop the war is to have what the international community and the United Nations and the International Court of Justice have declared to be the only solution, which is a two-state solution.
Thank you both for coming on and really trying to get your points across, no matter how different they are. And it's actually quite interesting that the same incident is seen in very different contexts. This was Beyond the Headlines. For more on this and other developing stories, visit thenationalnews.com. This episode was produced by Ben Barqawi and Arthur Edison. Du'a Farid is our editor, and I'm your host, Nada Al-Tahir.